The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.
Welcome to the 135th episode of Cars and Culture and a new year on SiriusXM. It's good to have you back listening again. I'm your host, Jason Stein. As we round the corner to nearly our third anniversary on this program, it's a sure thing to say that we've never had a guest like Colin O'Brady. Yes, he's a car guy who enjoys the sophistication of a well-engineered vehicle. Yes, he's been selected by Toyota and large dealer groups as a speaker in front of their organizations. His message is compelling, after all. But no one has told a story as unique as O'Brady's. He's not just an explorer who's crossed Antarctica. He's done it alone, and he's done it in record time against competition in the winter. It's where he is right now as this show airs. Yet another personal crossing over that barren landscape at the end of the world. Why? Because it's who Colin O'Brady is. It's his culture. It's his character. And it's why he's a guest on this program. A New York Times bestselling author, O'Brady is every bit inspiration and compassion and passion and achievement. And it all started with an injury that had occurred as a young boy that should have led to the loss of a leg or an inability to ever walk correctly again. But he's so much more than that. He's achieving extraordinary things in life, setting goals, sharing his story with business leaders, and reaching what he calls his 10 moment. It's even led to his teamwork with Toyota on a campaign called Start Your Impossible. He does the impossible, and now his is the story we get to share today on Cars and Culture.
Hi, I'm Colin O'Brady, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Not everybody's story is written in a way such as this, but it's been recently described that Colin O'Brady's story is neither cautionary nor inspirational. It's basically a psychological test for one's own character and aspirations. To what extremes would you go, and how much punishment would you endure in the service of a single goal? With that opening, Colin, welcome to the program.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Is that an accurate description of what you've done? And we're going to get into a lot of detail of what you've done, especially in the cultural world.
It's funny, I haven't heard that in a little bit. I believe that's a review from the New Yorker on my first book.
You're spot on.
I remember reading that a few years ago when that book came out, and it made me smile. I think it's a very interesting take. It has been described what I've done as inspirational, but I do think it's an interesting journey into the personal mind, body, and soul. And I often think that we live sort of in these lives of what I call, the zone of comfortable complacency, or sort of in this comfort zone. And I don't necessarily think that leads to the most fulfilling version of life. And so although I love the peak arc of life's experiences, these highs that we can experience, I also derive a lot of benefit from feeling the full tapestry of life's experience, from the lows to the discomforts to the challenges along the way. I think anyone who's been successful in business, anybody who gets to the end of their life and we sort of admire at scale and culture, I think oftentimes have endured a lot of hardship to get to where they are. I don't think it's the people that have sit quietly on their couch and just pass their days watching Netflix. So a lot of my own personal inspiration and journey has been to get out there and experience life from some of those extreme vantage points.
I would venture to say that there is no Netflix couch sitting that's going on in your home on a regular basis.
That's fair to say.
Take us through the journey of developing that kind of mindset. I know this doesn't happen overnight, and I know some of the struggles that you've been through, especially we'll talk a little bit about an accident that you suffered in 2008 in Thailand. But where does the mindset that you just described, does it layer in, or is there an aha moment? And maybe your aha was back almost, 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit, because I think that was really a seminal moment for me. And it's surprising to come from such a tragedy to actually, kind of make me stronger and shift my mindset ultimately in a positive way. But yeah, so I graduated from college. I had an economics degree from Yale. Most of my friends were, headed off to Wall Street. I thought maybe that's where I would end up. But There was sort of a curiosity inside of me to want to travel and explore a little bit. I'd had no money. Didn't have a lot of money as a kid growing up. I was a public school kid from Portland, Oregon, and I would paint houses in the summer. And I took that sort of small savings, a few $1,000 basically, and bought a one-way ticket by myself after college to go travel around the world, staying in youth hostels, sleeping on floors, hitchhiking, went through New Zealand, Australia, all through Southeast Asia, until I found myself on this small beach in rural Thailand on an island off the coast there. And I saw these guys who had lit a jump rope on fire, actually. And I'm 22 years old, no prefrontal cortex, not fully developed perhaps. And I thought, gee, that looks like fun. Let me go jump that rope. Turned out to be a terrible decision on my part. And in an instant, my life really changed. That rope wrapped around my legs and lit my body completely on fire to my neck. Fortunately for me, survival mode kicked in when I needed it most, and I jumped into the ocean to extinguish the flames, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned.
Primarily your legs and your feet.
Exactly. Yeah, my legs and feet mostly, which meant first of all, there was no ambulance. I had a moped ride down a dirt path to a one-room nursing station. They couldn't really move me. I was in such a fragile state. They did the best they could with the medical care they had, but I essentially went through 8 full surgeries where I went under general anesthesia. In rural Thailand, there was a cat running around my bed and across my chest in this sort of makeshift ICU. It was a tough set of circumstances. But your question, you asked about mindset. Truthfully, I was in the darkest place I've probably ever experienced in my young life at this moment. I was an athlete in college. I was a swimmer, kind of really in my body as my identity of who I was. And in an instant that was taken away. This doctor walks in, he looks me in the eyes, and he says, "I hate to tell you this, but it's my job to tell you the truth. You're probably never going to walk again normally." They thought how badly I was burned on my legs, that my ligaments, my knee joints, et cetera, would never regain full mobility. And I thought, wow, I really screwed up here. I don't know. I just kind of downward spiraled in my mind. My mother, incredible woman that she is, she shows up on about the 4th or 5th day, kind of tracks me down after hearing about this accident, flies across the world. And she sees me, crying and just in such a horrible place. Now, I actually just became a parent myself, have a 6-month-old baby, so I can relate to kind of what it might be like to be a parent and see your kid in this helpless state. And my mother tells me now she was crying herself in the hallways, pleading with the doctors for good news, but she actually never showed me any sort of fear. She walked in and said to me, "Colin, your life's not over. Let's dream with limitless possibilities. What do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. Let's look toward the future." And she kind of just kept in on me with this sort of positivity, if nothing else, daring me to dream. And she finally had me close my eyes. I closed my eyes. And she says, "If you could do anything when you get out of here, what would it be?" And I don't know why this came to me, but perhaps because I was an athlete and I thought myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon, not something I'd ever done before in my life. And I open my eyes and I tell her this. And this is actually the moment right here. I say, "Hey, I saw myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon," but I kind of say it with not a lot of confidence. I'm looking down at my bandaged legs. I half expect her to say, "Hey, Colin, I said set a goal, but maybe something more realistic, like look at your legs."
Right.
But instead, she says to me, "Great. That's your goal. Let's start working on it right now." And she yells over to the Thai doctor and says, Doc, bring my son in some weights. He's training for a triathlon." So in a matter of minutes of me proclaiming this, I'm lifting 10-pound dumbbells in a rural Thai hospital, talking about how I'm going to one day race a triathlon. And I think that moment, again, about your question about mindset, is such a sliding door moment in my life. And for many people, when we entrepreneurs who come up with a great idea, when we want to, make ourselves healthy, we say to our friend, "Oh, I want to run the New York City Marathon." It is, do you actually take action toward it immediately? Because it's so easy for all of the doubts to come into our mind and be like, "That's the stupidest thing. You're in a Thai hospital. You can't walk. You're going to be in a wheelchair. Why are you talking about a triathlon?" Or, "Oh, that business idea is good, but I don't have any money to start that business. How am I ever going to get it off the ground? I don't know anybody. That's never going to work," right? We are self-defeating kind of as design. And so that mindset shift was huge. I'll fast forward the end of the sort of story, which is I get back to the United States. I learn how to walk again. I take a job in Chicago in finance, trying to get myself back on my feet, quite literally and figuratively, with just a job and a career path as a young person. I sign up for the Chicago Triathlon. I spend a year training for it while I'm working in Chicago as a commodities trader. I race the Chicago Triathlon, and then to my complete and utter surprise, I don't just finish the race, but I actually win the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of nearly 5,000 participants on the
18
day.
months later. 18 months later. You failed to
Yeah.
mention that part. It was a year and a
Yeah,
half, and all of a sudden you were a first place triathlete.
exactly. And I think, the mindset, the sliding door moment happens in the Thai hospital with my mother, but me realizing the benefit of that in my own mind didn't happen until I crossed the finish line of the triathlon, which wasn't just a moment where I just said, well, let me pat myself on the back and realize I must be a great athlete. That's not where my mind went. My mind goes back to the Thai hospital, wondering what would have happened had my mom not forced me to look towards the future and set a measurable goal. And what I realized in that moment, not just myself, I believe that of any single person on the planet, is that we as human beings are sitting on reservoirs of untapped potential to achieve extraordinary things. And obviously not everything can be fixed by a simple mindset hack, but our minds are so powerful. I mean, the most important muscle I believe any of us have is the 6 inches between our ears. We're going to face tragedy. We're going to face setbacks. We're going to face hardships in our lives. But if we can find in those moments the ability to shift our mindset more towards the positive, there are really limitless possibilities, I believe, in what we can achieve on the other side of that. And ultimately, people ask me, if you had a time machine, you go back and whisper in your 22-year-old's ear, would you jump the flaming jump rope? And I say, I wouldn't wish the pain and suffering of that on my worst enemy. It was horrible. It was horrific. I was so afraid, and I still live with that trauma inside of my body. However, through that tragedy and the love of my mother and the recovery from that and the triathlon, ultimately, I learned some of life's greatest lessons. And that certainly has set me on the path of the last 15 years. I now sit here with 10 world records and have done things that no one in history has ever done with my mind, body, and soul. And I don't believe I would have had the strength or wisdom to understand that interplay of my own mind and body had I not gone through that tragedy and ultimately recovered from it.
It's a perfect analogy, the sliding door moment. I love that. I love the way that you phrase that. By the way, let's finish the story. You not only won the Chicago Triathlon, you went on to become a professional triathlete, raced in 25 countries on 6 continents, and representing your country in international triathlon competitions. This is all before the most remarkable part of the story, by the way. But this was you were with the dumbbells in hand. You were on your way, and it is the famous motto of a marathon runner is that the hardest step is the one out of bed every morning, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah, it really is. And I fundamentally believe that. I talk to, I do a lot of public speaking. I've talked to people all the time that, different walks of life, young, old, wealthy, getting started, doesn't matter. And it really is that inertia to get going and then to have the momentum to continue on with it. It is lifting the dumbbells on the first day, but it's also waking up the second day and lifting the dumbbells again and again and again. I a few years after the triathlon, I'm sure we'll talk about some of these adventures, but I summited Mount Everest in 2016, which has been a lifelong goal for me. And I picked up at the very summit. I get to the top, I'm obviously elated, but exhausted. And I look down on the ground, and of course there's ice and snow, and there's a little layer of rocks. And I see this kind of little, kind of stack of rocks, I suppose. And I pick up this tiny little pebble and I put it in my pocket, and I've carried it around with me for many years. This was back in 2016. And I carry that rock in my pocket from the summit of Mount Everest as a reminder that even Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, is really just a bunch of small rocks stacked on top of each other, what I think of as many steps leading to the summit. So your point about it's not the marathon or the peak performance at the Olympics on the day, it's the marathoner getting out of bed, taking one more step. And I think about that as stacking those millions and millions of rocks to reach that Everest-sized goal.
Remarkable. Why Everest? Let's get to that. How did you go from triathlete to rock climber?
Yeah, it was an interesting transition. I'd raced triathlon professionally for the U.S. national team for about 6 or 7 years. It was an incredible part of my life. Like as you mentioned, went all over the world and kind of pushed my body in that way. And then, as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do next, I kind of honed back in a little bit of that mindset I had in that Thai hospital. Like if I could do anything, what would it be? I had just gotten engaged at the time. My wife and I were my fiance at the time, were dreaming about our future. And I kind of tapped back into this childlike wonder of, I always wanted to climb Mount Everest. As a kid, I read every book about it. I was fascinated about it. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, staring up at Mount Hood from Portland, Oregon. So I guess mountains were sort of just always in my purview. And But then I went a step further, which is like, okay, Mount Everest, that would be amazing. Again, didn't have the money to necessarily go do that, but also, is there something more? And I learned about the 7 summits, which is the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents. And I learned about something called the Explorer's Grand Slam, which is if you take the 7 summits, you climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, as well as complete expeditions to both the North Pole and South Pole. That's called the Explorer's Grand Slam. And that was something that only about 50 people in history had ever achieved, ever. And most people take 5, 10, 15 years to do so. But I thought, what if I, kind of the athlete's mentality, what if I applied the athlete's mentality and said, could I do it faster than anyone? Could I set a world record for completing this Grand Slam? And by doing so, I figured I could maybe raise some sponsorship and funding, because I think it would be an interesting, story to follow. I knew nothing about kind of that game, but that's when I sort of rolled up my sleeves and started, knocking on every single door I could to get support for this project. It was going to cost, $500,000. And, as again, similar analogy, but it's, we can talk about the summit of Everest, and, ultimately I did set this world record for the Explorer's Grand Slam, doing all of that in 139 days. But that project actually lived and died in me waking up, sending emails, knocking on people's doors, and having 999 people slam the door in my face saying, this is a terrible idea. This is never going to work. I can't support and sponsor this. You're not a mountain climber. But still getting up out of bed, to use your marathon analogy, every day is just taking one more step, calling one more person, chipping away. And I eventually found myself, funny enough, in a 24-hour fitness doing a spin class. Actually, I'm in a spin class. And I walk in, my friend of mine introduces me to this other woman, 55-year-old woman, give or take, super fit. She's already sweating. She's working hard on the bike, introduces her. At this point, I'm 2 months away from my project, and I'm hundreds of thousands of dollars short. I'm probably not even going to be able to start. But I've just been out there every day with passion. I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. And I'd also started a nonprofit around inspiring young people to get outside and move their bodies. I really wanted to use this campaign to have, a lot of significant impact. So I had these big dreams, but the reality wasn't coming to put fruition. And I introduced myself to this woman. He says, oh, she actually had a world record in running back in college. She goes, 30 years ago, it's a million years ago. That's silly. But I was like, wow, cool. World record. I'm working on a world record. So I tell her the story, just 30 seconds, just real quick before we start spinning. I'm not pitching her nothing. I'm just talking to a woman in spin class. 30 minutes, spin class goes by, and I'm kind of down on myself because I'm like, I'm a professional athlete. And all of a sudden I'm in a spin class at 24-hour fitness. Like, where did my life go wrong here? And so I'm on my high horse. And so I'm going, finishing up the spin class, wiping my bike down from my sweat. And this woman, pulls me back over, and she goes, I've been thinking about what you told me. That's so cool. This world record and helping the kids. She goes, my husband loves stuff like this too. You should tell him about it. And she waves this guy over. She waves this guy over from the corner, walks over, shakes my hand. He goes, hey, how you doing? So again, I give him the 30-second spiel. I've been pitching this thing to businesses, to companies, doing everything I could to get in front of people. People have been saying no. And so I'm not pitching this guy, but I've got my little 30-second spiel down. So I say it, hey, Explorer's Grand Slam, world record project. This is what it is. Dreamed of climbing Everest. I want to help all these kids. And he looks down at me and goes, well, are you looking for sponsors for this project by any chance? And I said, I am. That's interesting you say that. And he goes, I think the company I work at might be able to help you. I said, great. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm in Portland at the time. Oh, where do you work? He goes, well, I work at Nike. And my eyes, of course, light up, right? I'm like, oh my God, Nike, it's a dream scenario. And I'd put together a website as I was out pitching this. I literally put my last life savings actually into this website to make it look professional and great, but no one had cared about my website at all. He goes, do you have a website by any chance? Maybe you can email me that on Monday. I'll check it out, see if it works for us. And I said, great. And he goes, well, let me get you a card. So he ruffles through his gym bag and pulls out a business card, hands it to me. I look down, it says, Mark Parker, CEO, Nike. And the rest is history. Nike got behind the project. We started the nonprofit. There's been over 1 million students enrolled in my nonprofit programs. But for me, again, going back to that mindset, for me, what I take from that lesson is, did I get lucky? Did I just get in the right place at the right time? Like, my answer to that is no. Certainly that was a fortuitous moment. But what I love to say is winners lose the most. Like, winners actually lose the most. We sometimes think about winners or successful people that there's sort of this innate quality that they just get there. But the only reason that I had a cogent pitch to when I was talking to the CEO of Nike, which I didn't even know, was because I failed 999 times before that. Right. But I kept trying. And so even in the midst of the most important conversation of my life to date, I was just polished. My passion shone through, and all of the failures and learning what didn't work actually landed the point when I needed it most. So I said to say, it's not winners win. Winners lose the most. The most successful people out there, entrepreneurs, athletes, you name it, musicians, have gone through a process of having setbacks, but still getting out of bed, taking those first steps, refining their craft, and ultimately building towards the future.
Ezra Freck has been on this program. He's a Paralympic athlete for Toyota. He talked about exactly the same thing, as has Gabby Thomas, another Olympic athlete who will compete for Team USA in Paris next year. They all, and Michael Jordan has said it as well. It's all of the failures that they have had has led them exactly to where they are today. And that leads us to, your success then created more opportunities. And I want to talk about 50 high points, because in late 2017, you and Jenna, your fiance, now wife, you went back to a whiteboard and basically began preparing for a world first attempt in Antarctica. And that would be an expedition that was called Impossible. Speaking of failure, right? Impossible. But you knew that it was going to be the most challenging physical, mental effort. And what did you do to get there? How did you get it done? How did you come up with and take on the 50 U.S. high points?
So there was a 50 U.S. high points, and then ultimately the Impossible First, which was the Antarctica expedition. Both those things happened in 2018, separate expeditions, and both kind of building upon each other. But really what happened was, I got back from this Explorers Grand Slam world record in 2016 and had garnered, the attention, like I said, to get the nonprofit going, and some press and media were starting to take notice, and that, the Nike sponsorship that started to build on the momentum of sort of having some more opportunities to do this at scale. And having just summited Mount Everest, I actually went around speaking to school kids for my nonprofit, spoke to thousands and thousands of school kids. And one question I started asking them, which is, what's your Everest? What's your Everest? I just climbed Everest, but what's your Everest? When I was, elementary school kid your age, I was dreaming about Everest. And what's fun was that, elementary school kids, they all raise their hands. They all just shoot their hands in the air and they want to tell you, like they're, my Mount Everest to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or my Mount Everest is to be make sure the snow leopards are off the endangered species list. And I've heard thousands of answers to this question. Then I would speak to high school kids. I was asked the same question, half as many hands. I would do some corporate speaking. I'd be lucky if I got, 10 hands at the back of the room. And I was like, what's happening here? And I realized that as students, as young kids, elementary school kids, we actually are born with this belief in limitless possibilities. But it's only as we go through life that life sort of boxes us into be more realistic. That's impossible. Sort of that negative feedback loop that we go throughout life with. And so I thought, man, I was enjoying all the speaking, and I still do. But I thought, I want to conjure that childlike. I want to be like the 8-year-old and the 9-year-old in the elementary school classroom. So I thought, I need to ask myself this question again. Colin, you just climbed Mount Everest, but what's your new Everest? What's your next Everest? I love to say that the top of one mountain is just the bottom of a next. And so I started dreaming again about what potentially I could do. And I set my sights first on the 50 high points, which was to climb the tallest mountain in each of the 50 US states faster than anybody. But ultimately what I wanted to do was something that no one in history had ever accomplished. So I set the world record for the 50 high points, but what was really germinating in my mind was, as you mentioned, this seemingly impossible project, which was to see if I could cross the entire continent of Antarctica solo, unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel. So you got to take everything with you, means dragging for me a 375-pound sled behind me over 1,000 miles via the South Pole from one edge of the landmass to the other edge of the landmass in Antarctica, and then fully human powered. Now, people had made solo crossings of Antarctica using kites. In the early days, you could use dogs in Antarctica. They're no longer allowed in Antarctica, but no one had ever actually made this crossing solo, unsupported, and human powered. And people had tried, going back to the, your history books of the Ernest Shackletons of the world and the, early 1900s polar explorers, all the way to modern day. A guy named Henry Worsley attempted this crossing in 2015. And he actually died just 100 miles away from completing the crossing. And because of all this and the history and these amazing people who had attempted it and tried, and this guy who was a very experienced guy dying trying, people started to say, hey, this crossing is impossible. The math equation doesn't really add up. Like, if you were to take enough supplies for you to be unsupported, you need to have 1,000 pounds in your sled. But of course, no human being can probably pull a 1,000-pound sled. So you just be sitting there stuck at the start line, not moving at all. But if you'd only take 300, 350 pounds, which you could maybe barely move, you're going to run out of food before you get to the other side of Antarctica. And I read about this, I researched it, I trained for it, I raised sponsorship the same way before. But ultimately, I thought to myself, this thing might actually be impossible. And so I actually called my project, which is also now the name of my New York Times bestselling memoir, The Impossible First. And some people have retrospectively looked back and been like, oh, that was an arrogant title of your book. You're going to make the impossible possible. I said, no, I named my project The Impossible First because I thought this might actually be impossible. However, that doesn't mean I shouldn't give it a shot. It's the shoot for the moon, because if you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. The curiosity of seeing where my body, mind, soul could be alone in Antarctica, even if it meant I failed 800 miles into a 1,000-mile journey, still piqued my curiosity because I was more interested at that point in doing something or trying something that had never actually been done. There was no playbook, not just doing something faster like I had in these previous mountaineering world records, but literally something where you can't call up a guy and say, how'd you do it? I might try to do it a little bit better. It's like, no one's ever done this. Can it be done?
And the New York Times called it some of the most remarkable, or called it the most remarkable achievement in polar history. Your expedition caught fire, had $2 billion in earned media impressions, and you had tens of thousands of kids engaging with your expeditions. So let's talk about crossing it alone. I mean, ideally, you want to go in a group, right? If only for psychological sturdiness, Tell us about it, and what was it that became I don't know, where was the breakthrough point in it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different stories to tease out, but for brevity, I'll just share a couple quick ones. You're absolutely right. Being alone in Antarctica is very difficult for a number of reasons. One, as humans, we're not really patterned to be alone, right? That's not something many of us ever experience. And even if we are alone, we pull out our phones to essentially not be alone, right? Listen to music, listen to a podcast, listen to Sirius XM, whatever that may be. And I was going to be alone for 55 days. And in Antarctica, the average temperature is minus 40 degrees. And also that time of year, the sun never sets. So you're essentially sitting in this white room with the sun directly overhead, but the temperature is so cold that, if your skin is exposed for a minute or two, you're going to get severe frostbite and ultimately would perish if you stayed out there for very long. The only way to stay warm is literally to keep moving the entire time to keep your blood flowing. The second you stop, your body temperature shuts down. You get hypothermic very, very quickly. So it's an intense environment, to say the very least. One of the other interesting factors of it, and one of the reasons that so much media in the end covered it, was unbeknownst to me, as I'm getting ready to fly down there, I'm announcing to the world, hey, I'm going to try this world record crossing. The New York Times had done a profile on me. On the other side of the pond in England, there was a guy named Captain Lewis Rudd, who also hadn't announced his project until right up before we were leaving. And he announced that he too was going to try to attempt to become the very first person in history to cross the entire continent of Antarctica solo and unsupported, human powered.
So now you got some competition all of a sudden.
Well, even funnier than that, you think, okay, so two guys are going to roughly try this. Well, it turns out that Antarctica, actually, there's basically one logistics operator, one guy with one plane that can fly to the edge of the Antarctic continent. There's only one season that you can do this. So before we know it, we're both in Antarctica, sitting in a cargo plane, shoulder to shoulder next to each other, getting flown to the start point of this expedition. It's no longer, yes, it's a curiosity, can this be pulled off? But now it's a head-to-head 1,000-mile race. And this guy, Captain Lou Rudd, is a British Special Forces total badass, one of the most experienced polar explorers in the world. And I'm looking at this guy in the face being like, at one point I thought this might be impossible, but there was something about somebody else sitting there being like, I'm going to do this. And the British have a long history of successful polar exploration. The Americans has been a part of American culture so much. And so he kind of looks over at me. He's like, there's a Brit should crack this journey first, And so it was just this super, super, super intense moment, to say the least. And then on day one, hour one, I start trying to pull my sled. It's 375 pounds and I can't pull it. I straight up can't pull the sled. I mean, I can pull it 10 feet and I stop, 15 feet and I stop. And I'm so defeated in the first hour that I actually start crying. I start bawling alone in Antarctica. I thought I might fail, but I didn't think I was going to fail in hour one. But what happens when you cry and it's minus 30, minus 40 degrees outside? Well, it turns out the tears, they actually freeze to your face.
Freeze to your face.
Yeah. Which is, it turns out, maybe the most all-time pathetic feeling ever you could possibly imagine. And so I think to myself, okay, Captain Lou's out here. We had started a mile apart from each other, equidistant to the first waypoint, but to give ourselves a little bit of kind of space, so to speak. And I think, well, he must be struggling too. So I finally look over in his direction, see where it's happening. He's not struggling at all. He's like a full military man in March, disappearing across the horizon. I can't see him. He's disappeared. He's gone. I can't move my sled. I'm crying. I'm like, wow, the wheels have fallen off the bus real quick here. What I did in that specific moment is I pulled out my satellite phone, actually, and I called home to my wife, Jenna, and she gave me some sage advice. It's simple advice, but she was like, Colin, forget about the world record. Forget about the 1,000 miles. Forget about Captain Lou. She goes, how far are you away from the very first waypoint? And I looked down, I said, I'm half a mile. And I'm complaining about a half a mile, which is funny now because I have 1,000 more miles to go. She goes, no, just get to that first waypoint. Get there, set up your tent. You'll at least feel like you made some progress. And tomorrow you can, try again. It takes me a few hours to do that, but I do that. I set up my tent at the first waypoint. I feel like at least, okay, I made some progress. And then I joke around. I set my alarm early, 5 a.m. I wake up and I kind of joke and say, well, who is in the tent with me? Of course, Captain Lou didn't come back to see me. But when I woke up, I felt like I was in this tiny little tent with the 5 or 6 worst versions of myself. They're all like kind of yelling back at me, like, Colin, you suck. You told the New York Times you can't even make it a day. You're terrible. This is the worst idea you've ever had. How the heck did you end up out here? Just kind of beating up on myself. I think we kind of all know this feeling of being really hard on ourselves. And I fundamentally believe that we are the stories that we tell ourselves, right? That mindset, that ability to kind of shift and evolve that mindset. And so I'm desperate at this point. I actually jump out of my tent and I start yelling to the endless abyss in Antarctica. I start yelling, Colin, you're strong. You're capable. You're strong. I'm like yelling at the top of my lungs. I'm just trying to override this negative inner dialogue. Now, it's not as if I just yell you're strong and capable and all of a sudden I fly across Antarctica 1,000 miles. That's absolutely not what happened. But it did kind of give me enough of a reset to be like, I can get one more waypoint. I can get one more day. I can break this down into small, micro chunks. Every day I'm going to eat some amount of food and that's going to make my sled a little bit lighter, which it's going to be imperceptible for day 1, day 2, day 3. But by day 20 or day 30, if you're still out there, you can start making, a little bit more distance every single day. And that's ultimately what happened on the 6th day. I passed Captain Lou out there. We have exchanged a few intense words with one another, but I, made a small lead on him. And then I was able to, keep ahead of him for the next 54 days and complete the world's first crossing of Antarctica solo and supported and human powered.
Unbelievable, Colin. Some of the details here. Marching 12 or 13 hours a day, often in a sensory void, you wrote. You also said you felt the quiet erosion of judgment and reason and sanity. Your thoughts would race, descending into that place of obsessive what-if fears, which you sort of alluded to. But I want to go to the 48th day when you were trudging along through Antarctica. And your hands felt like they were being crushed. What happened? Tell the story of what happened during a nasty storm and the tent.
Yeah. So I get to the South Pole on day 40. And obviously that's a big moment. The South Pole, there's a few structures there. There's a scientific research base, actually. And in the Antarctic summer, there's some scientists that work out of there. It's a U.S. research base. But I can't go inside. I can't take a cup of coffee. I can't really take anything from a scientist. A scientist would walk up to me and hand me a cookie and I ate it. It would negate my solo unsupported crossing. But it's the only building or sign of civilization I've seen in 40 days. So I take a quick picture in front of the sign that says you're at the South Pole and I continue onwards. And I've been in some bad storms up to that point, but I just started getting beat down by storms at this point for the next, 7 to 10 days, unrelenting, 50, 60 mile per hour winds, as high as minus 70-degree wind chill. And at this point, my food supplies are running really low. I was actually from day 1 burning about 10,000 calories, but I was only eating about 7,000. So I've, losing weight every single day. So my ribs are sticking out. My hip points are sticking out. My body's so depleted. And it was actually in this moment, around day 46, 47, 48, where I had thought to myself, how did Henry Worsley in 2015 make it 900 miles and die 100 miles from the finish line? He was so close. I'd always, like, how could that happen? And it was in this moment that I started to see, oh, this project isn't about day 1 or day 10 or day 20. It's the last 100 miles when you're so depleted, you have so little food, your judgment is eroded, that you can make silly mistakes that can be fatal. And I did just that on the 48th day. I'm in a storm. I'm exhausted. My mind's not thinking super clearly at this point, and I need to set up my tent. I've set up my tent, 47 other times at this point. And obviously in all my training and practice, I've got it pretty down to a science, even in high winds, but it's really hard to set up a tent in extremely high winds, obviously. And for a second, there's a bit of a lull in the wind and I rush it. So I try to set up my tent. I'm moving quickly, I get the tent pole erected in this, but normally I would put a safety line and connect it to my sled just in case there was a gust of wind, but it seemed calm for a second. So I just rushed it. I made a mistake. And all of a sudden this gust of wind comes up and it picks up my tent into the air. And I even now I can feel the rush of adrenaline through my body as I tell this story. I was watching my life blow away from me because I didn't have a backup shelter, because weight was so important. I took as much food as I could. I took no backup tent, no backup, safety, rescue thing. My tent is picked up in the air and it is about to blow away in the endless abyss of Antarctica. If the snow or the wind gets it, it's gone. I'm alone in Antarctica, no shelter, no hope for immediate rescue. It could take several days, best case scenario in a storm like this, for anyone to find me. It's dire consequences. And so I just take instinctually, I remember I just take like these 2 steps towards it and I jump like a football player, like fully laid out, making a touchdown catch. And I reach with my last fingertips and I reach out and I grab the tent fabric and wrestle it to the ground. And to say the least, it was a very, very, very close call. It's almost like, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, like the house gets picked up in the tornado and flies off into the endless abyss. Like that was my tent, my shelter, my lifeline.
Had your home. You had your home back.
And it just, boom, gone. And so I got in that tent that night. I actually, again, there's a theme here. There was more tears. I cried. Actually, I have a video of me crying into my GoPro saying, I wish I could give up. And I think if there had been an ejector seat button that I could push at that point to just go home, I probably would have packed it in. But I was shaken. I was afraid. And I realized that my judgment, my mental acuity, my body was breaking down to such a significant degree. And to get the next, at that point, I was maybe 100, 200 miles to completing it was going to require the utmost focus that possibly could, that I would not want to make any major fatal mistakes. So it was an intense moment, to say the least.
You lost 25 pounds during the journey, correct?
Yeah, give or take, maybe a little more than that. It took a little while till I weighed myself, but yeah, I was a bag of bones when I got back there. I think my wife hardly recognized me on the tarmac when I landed back in South America.
The journey, everything that you've done to this point, you are an inspirational, motivational speaker for a lot of groups. I mentioned a couple of Toyota athletes earlier. You do speak to automotive groups. You share your the culture of what you've built, perhaps inside your own mind. but tell us a story of what you share with business leaders and how it applies to what they do, and particularly the automotive leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I love to say that I believe all of us in business or in life, we have a masterpiece that we can paint on any canvas. And my canvas just happens to be the ends of the earth and mountaintops. And I don't care if you don't want to go freeze your butt off in the middle of nowhere. That's not your thing. We all have an Everest-sized goal or ambition inside of us collectively as a business or as individuals in our own personal life. And so for me, I love, public speaking. I've written a couple books. I love storytelling, not from the, hey, look at me vantage point. Didn't I do this cool thing? Let's talk about it. But it's only to excite people's minds and bodies to their own Everest, to their own peaks, their own summits, and really, what they're capable of. So for me, with all my public speaking, and it's been really great to be able to do that in the automotive industry, is to inspire leaders to really think differently, like I said before, winners lose the most. And I have a methodology that I've developed that I share with a lot of the corporate groups that I speak to that I call the Go Beyond method. And it's sort of 5 core principles that I really like to drive home. Obviously, don't have the time to go deep into all of them right now, but one of them is about what I talked about when we started this interview, about the ones and tens, those peak life experiences. When I got to the end of Antarctica, I touched that post, and it was the peak moment of my life in terms of achievement. And I realized that our lives are kind of, I guess we experience them on what I consider a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being our lowest low moments and 10 being our high highs. And we all want these 10s, right? If you're a business leader, you want to, make the most money or the most revenue. If you're Elon Musk this week and you release the Cybertruck, you want the coolest badass car that can beat the Porsche 911, off the line. It's a funny side note. One of my closest friends, Mickey Agarwal, she actually got the VIN number 1 Cybertruck this week. So she was at the Tesla event and Elon Musk gave her the first keys. And she just sent me a video this morning of her driving around Austin, like everywhere she goes now, like her car is like surrounded. I look forward to getting a ride in that soon. But anyways, these 10s, right? These high highs, we all want this. But we hedge against the ones. We don't want to experience the ones, right? That's getting your heart broken. That's, having a momentary setback or failure in business, right? We try to hedge against the ones. But when I touched that post on the end of Antarctica, I realized that my ones and 10s are connected. I didn't get to this 10 moment in spite of my ones. I got there because of my ones. And as I mentioned before, I think too often businesses, leaders, people in their personal life sit in what I call this zone of comfortable complacency between 4 and 6. And this is just one of the 5 principles of the Go Beyond method, but just going a little deeper on it, it's my first principle because I think it's really powerful, which is I believe we need to embrace the ones. Because when we hedge against the ones, we take the ones off the table, we also take the momentum to have that peak arc swing back to the 10s. In a business that sits only in the zone of comfortable complacency, not being reckless with our risks and times, but taking calculated risks by being at sometimes able to step outside of that comfort zone, step outside of that tent when the wind is blowing and it's cold on your face. Experiencing that grit of the 1s and the 2s and the 3s actually allows you to build that momentum forward and ultimately reach those 8s, 9s, and 10s on the other side of the spectrum. So for me, it's a great passion to sort of share these stories, but with principles that actually really break down, that people can walk out of a room from a speech or walk away from the book and actually apply that directly in their own life. And the automotive industry is particularly fun for me because automotive is really around efficiency, is around high performance, right? If you look at racing, that even the biggest brands that we think of, sort of broad-based brands for the general public, they still usually have an R&D division that's like, how do we get this the fastest? How do we get the best fuel economy? How do we optimize this? And there's objective measures against that. So automotive is a fun industry to speak to because I think there's a lot of people, engineers, et cetera, that are really thinking about high performance across all the verticals of a business like that, which makes it fascinating.
And you've teamed up with Toyota to do something too.
Yeah, I did. They for their Start Your Impossible, campaign. And so when I got back from my Impossible First expedition and they were running a bunch of ad campaigns, they still do it for the Olympic campaigns and athletes. I worked with them on a number of events. One was really fun that we did a big event at the Smithsonian in DC. Had me addressing a bunch of automotive leaders while standing in front of the space shuttle inside the Air and Space Museum. So it was sort of this, to me, I was just humbled to be in that room. But, as an authority speaking about impossible and the Toyota executives thinking about, how to dream for the future, how to build, not just cars, but mobility for, all people. How do we move around this world? And so I've loved that campaign and being able to be a part of it and share that message of kind of dreaming impossible dreams, but actually turning those dreams into reality.
And dealer groups too. You've talked to dealer groups.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been, several dealer groups. I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Ken Garf Automotive, based out of, Salt Lake City, but in the broader Mountain West, has brought me in several times to do a couple things with their groups, which is really fun to get to know those folks as well. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the work I've done in the automotive industry, and it's been a really fun. I think it's a message that really lands for folks that work in that industry.
Colin, final couple of things. What's next for you?
I don't know. By the time this airs, I'm leaving home in a week to actually go back to Antarctica for the first time. Not my first time back in Antarctica, but the first time in this way to actually attempt a world record down there. The speed record, actually, solo unsupported from the coast to the pole. So it's a slightly shorter journey. It's a 700-mile journey, but there's there's no going and crying on the first day. So basically take as little gear as I possibly can and try to cover that distance in under 24 days. So if people are tuning in, that I might actually be out there in Antarctica. It'll be kind of mid-December into mid-January when I'm out there. And then one of the other things I'm really excited about, the book that I came out with last year is called The 12-Hour Walk. Like I said, I love to bring people into something that they can apply in their own lives. And I have this book, but really I can sum it up in a sentence, which is a call to action for people to walk out their front doors, turn their phone on airplane mode, no podcast, no music, and go for a 12-hour walk. That's how long I was walking every day in Antarctica. Now, people say, I can't walk that far. I don't care. Take as many breaks as you want. You could walk for 1 minute and take a break for 59. But the exercise, a mental exercise of being alone in your own mind, body, and soul for 12 hours. There's a whole book about it, website 12hourwalk.com. And on January 6th, actually, I'm doing a global walk day. Last year when I did this, I had people in 40 different countries participate. There's an app that tracks you. And it's really about people taking a day in their own mind, body, and soul, and the stillness and silence of that. I learned that in Antarctica, but I actually started applying it in my day-to-day life, walking from my front door during COVID. And I've now had over 100,000 people complete the 12-hour walk, and everyone comes back with their own insights. But it's crazy how often we don't spend alone, how we distract ourselves in the day-to-day. So this is just like, again, it's a free idea that I share freely with the world, but it's amazing to see the life-changing benefits for folks. And again, it's a way for me to say, hey, that you don't have to walk across Antarctica. Walk out your front door. Take a half a day by yourself. If people are interested to learn more about it, check out 12hourwalk.com, or even better, sign up for free to join on the January 6th Global Walk Day. You'll be walking alone from your front door, but buoyed by the sort of excitement and momentum of a global community who are all, striving to tap into their own mind, bodies, and souls, and ultimately use those lessons learned in the stillness and silence of your own mind to apply to climbing your own Everest moving forward.
With the intellect of an academic, the passion of an athlete, and the courage of an explorer, Colin melts away the perception that achievement is for the select few, and illuminates what it takes to reach big goals, and ultimately reveals what matters most. That is the Impulsible First book, as well as the 12-Hour Walk. We appreciate you sharing your story here on Cars and Culture. You are your own culture, Colin.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thanks once again to my guest today on Cars and Culture, explorer and inspirational speaker, Colin O'Brady. And to see my interview with Colin, go to the Cars and Culture YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to see more than 130 interviews and more than 1,000 videos. I'm Jason Stein. Thanks for joining us on episode 135 of Cars and Culture. We'll see you down the road.